Public Sector Leadership, a conversational series, examining and anticipating, under the microscope and through the telescope. In this expert roundtable, clean energy for local government. Under consideration, public sector leadership and clean energy, renewables, the environment, pragmatism, procurement and policy. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining the conversation. And first, I'm going to ask you to help me. Public sector leadership and clean energy. Why does it matter? Why is it so important? Why, Heather, do we need this conversation?
Thank you, Robin. Such an important question. Well, why does it matter? It's never mattered more than it does at this time. We're at a time where there is a great need for change, and also there are great opportunities for change. So I think thinking about the public sector and councils in particular, if we think about councils as the custodians of places, councils have a real responsibility to show leadership both to their communities and to the other organisations working within their places to support the energy transition and move us forward as quickly as possible.
Heather, that's superbly persuasive. Thank you. Kat?
Absolutely. I agree with you, Heather. The energy transition is very much underway, and the impacts of it will be seen in communities. That's the next step. So it's key that local leadership is that driving force to make sure the energy transition works for communities rather than is done to them.
Thank you. Niall?
And echoing that, I think there's going to be a requirement for a certain degree of courage in that leadership task, particularly in terms of the politics, but also in terms of managerial leadership, given the context of public services at the moment. There's never been a more important issue in terms of community resilience, in my view, than making sure that we have a just transition.
You're putting the pitch pretty high there, Niall. Courageous leadership, and never a more an important issue. Those are strong reasons to listen in to what we've got to say. Nigel?
Well, we're at a point where local authority budgets have never been under greater pressure, and also a time when decarbonisation targets are getting closer in their deadlines, and renewable energy offers a really great way to introduce long-term energy cost control as well as scale into decarbonisation plans.
It sounds like the graphs are coming to a point where without this kind of change we won't be able to recover from what we're heading towards. Heather, you've recently, I believe, undertaken some research. Can you tell us more about who you did that research with, what you found out, what the recommendations were? Tell us about what you've been uncovering on this crucial issue.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So LGIU, a membership organisation supporting local government in England, Ireland, Scotland and Australia, we have been working with the Commercial Services Group looking at the energy transition and looking at the factors that are affecting the energy transition for councils. So I'm really happy to say we spoke to a lot of people. So one of the really positive findings of this research is that people really wanted to be involved, and they really wanted to support the research by giving their views and giving their council's perspectives. So we were in the happy position where we had to actually extend our research programme purely to allow the people who wanted to be part of it to be part of it. So
fantastic.
I mean, I think I mentioned that specifically because I think it gives a sense of the positivity and also the commitment to this agenda. So we spoke to 32 councils across England and Wales, a range of councils, and the findings were incredibly interesting and also very inspiring and optimistic. So I'm happy to say that one of the things that really came across from our research is that the political commitment remains undimmed. So all the councils that we spoke to, whether a district, a unitary, a county, their commitment...
And forgive me, regardless of political persuasion as well?
Also regardless of political persuasion, regardless of political complexity. What we heard consistently from all of our participants, whether they were political representatives or they were officer representatives, was that the commitment in that council was undimmed. But we also heard of delivery
I
challenges.
thought you were about to put some kind of blemish on that positivity.
Yeah. So I think one of the fascinating parts of the research was that we spoke to both politicians and officers. So we got a sense of the political ambition, but we also got a sense of the delivery challenges.
Okay.
So on the one hand, we heard that there was a continued high level ambition, but we also heard that there are some significant challenges which are really starting to affect both pace and viability.
So tell me just a little bit more, forgive me, about that difference between the political perspective and the delivery perspective. Who's pressing ahead with more enthusiasm, if I can ask that question?
Well, I wouldn't say that anyone on any one side had more enthusiasm or the other. I think, there's different challenges. So what we have is we've got politicians who are setting the agenda, they're setting the targets, and they're the people who are driving forward the strategic ambition. But of course, officers who are driving forward the work, they're the ones delivering the projects. They're essentially at the sharp end, so they're coming up against delivery challenges, whether that's technical challenges, capacity challenges. So I think, what we're seeing, of course, is that there has to be a balance. So one of the things that we're seeing is that officers are responding to those challenges and councillors are responding accordingly by thinking what's the best way to continue delivery in their particular areas. So what we're seeing is that councils are starting to approach their transition on, I'd say, a sort of project by project basis. So there's real challenges approaching things from a strategic area-wide perspective, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your views about that. So we're seeing that councils, I suppose, are sort of grasping the opportunity by delivering in the ways that they can, which is project by project based on individual project viability.
That's fascinating, Heather. And I want to just give a little bit of context to this. I'm going to come to you, Nigel, if you don't mind, because we've got an appetite, we've got an energy around potential for delivery. We've got some barriers, which I'm sure we can talk about in a moment. But we've also got a rich context around energy provision, risk, volatility, sourcing, pricing. Nigel, can you just fill us in a little bit more on that from your expert perspective?
Yes, I think it's commonly understood the challenges that high energy prices have given us over the last few years, whether that's around managing our own energy budgets or potentially impacting the communities we work within. I think there's possibly less understanding about what energy prices might look like into the future, and that volatility and that price. So the last 6 years has been a real period of extremes. We went from record low prices during COVID when energy demand was suppressed, flipping to record high prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That volatility has continued over the last few years, and we've now got another surge in prices with what's going on in Iran. But I think even outside those world events, we'll expect to see volatility going out further into the future. So the whole fundamentals of energy supply and demand in the UK is changing. We're seeing increase in electricity demand through electric vehicle rollout, electrification of heat, prevalence of big energy usage like data centres becoming more and more common. At the same time, our energy supply is increasingly switching towards renewables that tend to be intermittent in their nature. So that doesn't mean necessarily energy prices will keep going up, but it means they will be volatile. So it's really important to have a strategy that allows you to play into that volatility. That means you've got a procurement strategy that is making sure you're not buying at the highs and cherry picking the lows wherever you can.
And how far into the future should we be looking to make sense of the comments you've just made? Is this 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Where are we looking?
So historically, most local authorities have looked at energy as a 3 to 5 year commodity. And that's normally how far energy market prices transfer into the distance. Some of the challenges, though, is we really need to get visibility about what costs might look like for 10, 15, 20 years into the future to assist with some of that strategic planning. So in some of the ways you can be looking at things like large-scale renewables to give you more cost certainty, move away from that volatility, but also help with longer-term planning, as well as feeding into your decarbonisation plans and goals as well.
So potentially win-win-win.
Yes.
But you can't just sit back and wait for it to happen.
Exactly that. And they were, a while ago, it's seen as very competing factors. Do you go cheap or do you go green? And actually all those roads now point to the same direction. So it's about updating your strategy to take advantage of that. That's
really insightful. Niall, you've got lots of experience in relevant areas, local government leadership and so forth. Can you just give us a sense of how what Heather is saying from a research perspective and Nigel is saying from an energy sector perspective, to what extent is this making sense to you? Does it ring true?
Absolutely is ringing true. And Nigel's point about that long-term horizon scanning in relation to the strategies we need to be deploying in order that we can get certainty as far as we can in this volatile environment we're in. It absolutely requires the leadership of local governments and the ability to go beyond and transition beyond the political cycle. So generating that consensus politically and managerially about long-term investment requirements in order that we can make the necessary infrastructure investment and capital allocations to make that transition work effectively, as well as our procurement challenges, will be absolutely what we need to do next.
Is that what you meant in your opening comment about being courageous?
Yes, it is. It's about, I think, understanding this is existential.
Okay.
The climate emergency, without doubt, is fundamental to the security of our communities, and we're beginning to get the implications and impacts already in terms of the impact on climate change within vulnerable communities. That goes beyond the political, in my opinion. That's something which is more than something which is debated in the chamber. It's something which is at a higher order. And that requires collaboration and cooperation and courageous, continuous, long-term leadership. And it also requires communities to be brought along too, so that nobody's left behind. The decarbonisation of our economy, the last time arguably we did leave people behind in the coal industry, we can't do that a second time. We really must make sure those who are most vulnerable are brought forward and also get the benefits of this green transition in order that the green collar employment opportunities which are emerging are available to all of those communities as well. So the benefits can be multifold if they're properly understood, properly planned for, and there's sufficient long-term vision and leadership to make sure that transition occurs.
So we're pushing short-termism to one side.
Absolutely.
We're pushing convenience to one side. We're putting perhaps political preference or allegiance partially to one side to say this is something that takes a much longer term, bolder, clearer vision.
Absolutely. You know, we often talk about noble causes requiring courageous leadership, and this is the noblest cause, I think, at the moment, because it's so relevant and it's so racinated into all other policies and all other activities and public services. If we don't get this right, then we will adversely impact on communities in the longer term. That intergenerational obligation we have for leadership at the moment has never been more stark.
Thank you, Niall. So we're getting positive messages from Heather about appetite, strong indications from Nigel about the state of the market and the need to move. We're getting a really clear indication of, let's call it moral purpose. We can find other language for it. I know, Kat, you've got a strong perspective about making sure that these changes in energy provision and energy procurement don't have a detrimental impact on people regardless of their circumstance in the towns across our country. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, about how energy provision interplays with issues to do with justice and equality?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, the energy transition is very much underway, and there's a risk for local areas, for local communities, that it will happen to them. Local leadership has a core role in making the energy transition and taking all of the opportunities. The research that we've done looked at local area energy planning in particular, but it can be broadened to energy planning. Now, not all councils are doing this, not all councils are bought into it, and if it's done well, it can identify exactly where the interventions, the investable interventions, will have the biggest benefit for communities, for local priorities, for things like economic development, for reducing inequalities, and ensuring through that process that there's community buy-in.
Can I take it down to a really fundamental level? How is it that or how can it be that what my local authority does in relation to energy sources, how does that have an impact on me in my street, in my job, with my children? I'm trying to see that connection.
So the types of things that we identify when we're energy planning are so much broader than generation. There's things like insulation, ensuring that homes are warm, reducing demand for energy. That's a big part of making sure that the energy system is long-term sustainable. So we can identify where, because local area energy planning and because local authorities are at the right scale to understand their communities and to identify areas with the most need, we can say, here's an area where we know that interventions, we know that resource and time and investment will have the biggest impact in the long term for those communities. And that includes schools. There's a big push where lots of, so I work for the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, and lots of councils are looking at solar panels on schools, but it's bigger than that. It's more than just putting solar panels on schools, for example. And from Sheffield, they've used local climate bonds to raise the capital to invest in solar panels. Now that's de-risked the project, meaning that the council can go ahead with it. It's brought in engagement. As we said, the moral angle is that it's not just a moral angle, but people get it. People get that climate change is happening and they want to do something about it. So we're seeing that huge amounts of money is starting to be unlocked by people wanting to invest in their communities. And then once we see that surplus from the paying off of the solar panels, that can be used to do things, innovative projects like reduce bills in local areas, for local people, engage with people, engage with young people in the schools around the jobs of the future. It's not just about creating energy, but it's also about demonstrating the art of the possible and talking about what the careers of the future are for young people.
Thank you, Kat. That makes so much sense. You're linking together so many different dimensions. It's not just about the purchasing of the energy or the source of the energy, but it's about all these different elements within society, the impact that can be had in what's a complete cultural and social change that's unfolding. I'm interested, Heather, because you spoke to more than 30 different councils about these kind of issues. To what extent is their planning aligned with the insights that we've just had from Kat?
Well, I think quite aligned. I would say that councils, by the nature of their role that they play in an area, they have to take that broad strategic view that Kat's just described. So councils don't have the luxury of thinking just about energy generation or skills. They have a moral obligation to be thinking about all of these things, all of these factors affecting society now and in the future, and they need to take the longest possible view that they can. So I think that councils do get it and they do want to take the broadest possible view, but of course there are capacity constraints. And in my introduction I talked about the fact that there is a little bit of a gap, I would say, between the political ambition and the reality on the ground. And I think that gap comes home to roost in some of the things that we're talking about here. As you said, councils have never been more financially constrained, and I think that translates directly into their capacity and their ability to evolve and scale up. So I think huge ambition, but constraints. And that's why we would love to see councils being supported to work together. I think councils across the country and indeed across borders, they're tackling the same challenges and they're responding to the same challenges and opportunities. So the more that we can do to build mechanisms, to build collaboration, to help people take that broader view and resolve some of those capacity changes, that's where we could really start to unlock some scale.
This is strong stuff, because what you're telling me is that we can list the barriers to implementing local area plans, but that those barriers can be surmounted. Niall, I'm just wondering if you could just respond to that. Are we locked into a doom cycle, or are there ways of overcoming some of those barriers to ensure that at scale these changes can be planned for and implemented?
Without question. So One of the things I was involved with recently was the 3CI Cities Climate Investment Commission, which is exactly about that. It's about creating a collaborative leadership space for the interventions and investment required for the transition to net zero. At COP26, the Commission was launched in Glasgow. Along with that, it also is a collaboration, or was a collaboration. Its final report was published today, in fact.
Okay.
It was a collaboration between various sectors, with the banking, finance, insurance sector, as well as civil society, along with approximately 82% of the population of the United Kingdom, the represented organisations from local governments. And it's precisely that issue about capability and capacity being shared and distributed, a real focus on the adaptive leadership challenge of making that transition work, about deploying those resources and looking at the collectivism that's required, and actually the aggregation of interventions that will be needed in order that we can make that transition work effectively, efficiently, and with the available resources and finances.
So if we need those inter-authority connections to come strong, if we need people to be working, as you've said, across regions, across areas, what would be the obvious, most potent next steps for those in local authorities? Are there still quick wins for people, or is it time to buckle down, join together and work on some of that longer term stuff?
So one of the things which I'm taking heart from is the fact that there is so much innovation.
Okay.
So many things have been done around this issue at a micro as well as a macro scale. There's lots of innovation and creativity being brought to bear. But the danger is we become competitive.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do...
And isolationist, I would guess, in that
absolutely.
respect, yes.
So therefore it's cultural as well as technical. We have to, as public leaders and political and managerial spheres, share. It's all public money in the end. And that collaboration will then enable us to make that transition much more swiftly, in my opinion. Because the innovation which exists in Yorkshire can be used to look at problems within London or the Southwest or any other part of the UK, and then to learn from that and then adapt and use. And that's a cultural issue, really. But also, I suggest it's also a bandwidth issue, which talks to Nigel's point about the financial stresses which are impacting, and also the capability, without at all being pejorative, of some colleagues in local government, which has been somewhat denuded over the last 15 years. We can't deny that happens in terms of all areas of public services.
Which is often to do with breadth of remit as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, and you know, 15 years of austerity has led to denudation of local government capacity and capability, and that is not to blame or say anything, it's a description. And we need to rebuild that if we're going to take this transition seriously.
So Heather, you've been seeing it to some extent from inside the current reality, and Niall is looking at ways in which that can be moved forward, drawing on really valid experience. Nigel, I'm interested because you're approaching this from an energy partner's perspective to some extent, and what would you want to see, what would you need to see in a local area plan or in one of these kind of collaborative arrangements? What would you want to be looking for in order to best secure that promising future people have been talking about?
Yes, so under our laser brand at Commercial Services Group, we work with a number of local authorities on implementing their local area energy plans, and anything that gives context around how the plan was pulled together or the next steps of that plan is really helpful in bringing it to life. So a few examples with that would be, are there a pipeline of projects available? So has it been brought down to a schedule of the types of works that we need to put in place? Is that still at desktop? Is there a feasibility stage? Is there a live set of works to make those happen is one particular area. A funding strategy is really key. So one local authority said to us recently, it's like you need to win the business case twice. Once to prove that it stacks up in its own right, and secondly to prove that you can compete to get the capital funding that may already be very constrained to make that project happen. And thirdly, stakeholder engagement. So areas that can be a barrier if they're not treated well up front can really help to facilitate and accelerate plans if they're done correctly. So that could include discussions that might have taken place with your local network operator around feasibility of getting these projects rolled out. It could be around engagement with community groups who, by the likes of grassroots community energy groups, can really bring impetus to plans. They can raise money, they can raise capital, they can make these projects happen. So I'd say all of those areas are really key to be able to get some almost flavour around the plan to understand how it's pulled together and areas you can prioritise to make it happen.
Thank you. And just building on your earlier comments, Kat, I'm just wondering where, I'll call them the public, I mean that's a generic term and potentially a dangerous term because people are not homogenous, but how do we engage the public in this process as well?
It's a really good question, and one that lots of local authorities and lots of organisations are grappling with, because there's a big question around where in the process is it appropriate. People don't want to be over consulted, but people do want to be able to shape plans. So some local authorities in the research that we did found that they brought in local communities, like community groups, in early stages, and that's been successful. Others not so much. But it's a question of being innovative and making sure that the local area energy planning or energy planning more broadly is flexible and can bring communities in at the right time.
And this may be, Heather, something that your research once again gives us some insights on. Are there particular messages that work, or is it something that really needs to be adapted according to context? I'm thinking about trying to sell these longer term plans that Niall's described, these collaborative plans, the level of investment. I'm thinking of trying to sell it not just to people within the council building, but more widely. Yeah.
And I think this is an area where local context and local expertise and knowledge is really key and really critical. I think one of the things that we're seeing with the changes happening within English local government is that councils generally are likely to get larger and represent bigger populations, and we're also going to see a shift towards more regional working. But even where we're starting to think about regional working and working at scale, as we talked about with Niall, I think councils are, I suppose, the critical organisation for interacting at that community level. And one of the things that we heard really strongly in our research with it, which I think is fascinating, is that communication is flexible, and the communication they're using is adaptable and flexible according to the people that they're talking to and according to the benefit that they are sharing. So again, one of the things that came across really strongly is that councils are talking about different types of benefits. You know, we know from the types of projects we're talking about here that there are multiple benefits, there are myriad benefits, whether it's from bill reduction to warmer homes to energy security. And I think that presents a real opportunity, actually, that, you know, there's multiple benefits. So that gives you the flexibility to hone the message, to adapt the message according to who you're talking to.
So be really
and the
clear
local context.
What you want to say, but also be clear what it is the people you're talking to need and want to hear.
Yeah.
Don't create a dissonance
no
between
one size
the two,
fits all, no.
but make sure that you're communicating authentically to the people.
Definitely,
Yeah.
and I think that makes perfect sense, because when you think about councils and the areas that they represent, they're not homogenous. You know, they're not single places representing, you know, single communities. They're diverse. They're representing lots of different types of community and different types of needs. So I think when you think about it, it makes perfect sense that the messages are get adapted. But I think what was fascinating for me was hearing from councils and hearing from their own experience the extent to which that message might be adapted. So in one ward, they might have a completely different communication plan to how they might have in another ward. Yeah, so it's just really tailored and based on a really detailed knowledge of the community that you serve.
Thank you, thank you. I'm just moving a little bit towards the and now so what's next piece, because it feels to me as though our conversation has kind of highlighted the crucial issues, the context, the imperative. So now what? Niall, I'm going to turn to you for that, if I may, and then Nigel, perhaps you might want to respond. Niall.
As Heather said, there's three things, if I may say something about that. I couldn't agree more with Heather's comment about local leadership. We worked in my previous authority with the Young Foundation to do precisely that, to really look at ways in which we can mobilise and advocate and encourage advocacy within communities for leading on the climate emergency. But the one thing which I think we need to practically do in terms of delivering change is really recognise the nature of capital in local government and how that's treated, particularly when you're in the space of innovation. Sometimes projects do not fly, they do not pass muster, but the availability of revenue to do those business cases is scarcer than the capital to deliver it, even though capital is also constrained. So some liberation in relation to that in terms of the capital rules would be very valuable. Going forward, I think, in terms of what we would require, what I think is needed, is a clear mandate for local leadership, a clear mandate from government, a clear mandate from all national local government leaders that this is something which is a priority for tackling for all of our communities, and stating that this is something which will require long-term, stable and committed leadership. It is a system, leadership, adaptive challenge, and we need to get the system to work effectively.
So that's about expectation, permission and provision.
Absolutely, all
getting
of
those
things.
three elements right.
Yeah.
Nigel, I said I'd come to you on this because you're looking at it from another perspective, but tell me, what next immediate steps would you see as being the most pressing?
Yeah, Niall touched on funding there and the challenges around funding, and that's still the single biggest issue we hear from our local authorities we work with in barriers in putting in place projects. I'd say over the last few years, combined with the austerity that's reduced capability and capacity in some of the in-house teams, it's been increasingly important to look externally around that.
Okay.
Funding regimes have tended to come and go, and it's first in best dressed in those areas, and actually that's meant a number of local authorities have been left behind, a number have been disenfranchised with those schemes, and at the moment there's a hiatus until those new schemes have come around. But I would say around the funding there's potential to work with bodies like the National Well Fund, who are very collaborative around how they can help you and guide you through that process. And also published earlier in 2026, we had Great British Energy's local power plan, and part of that will be making money available for capability and capacity building and project implementation. So there's definitely a strong argument to say engage with that plan early. The details are still being worked out about how it will be delivered, but there are expression of interest channels to be registering projects that you can start to put them out there in the barriers you're facing with a view that you might get some support to try and help through those.
That's really practical. Thank you. And so thank you to everyone who's joined this conversation, whether you're here in the room or you are listening or watching. I'm just going to ask the participants around the table just to finish for me with one thought each around either an action or a change in perspective that's needed. I don't know who wants to go first on this.
I'll go first if I may. So a change in perspective, I think would be required, is emerging actually, about this being a top priority for local leadership across sectors. And the leadership which is beginning to emerge in the new strategic authorities and mayoral combined authorities is absolutely inspiring. Some of them are doing some fantastic thinking and work already in terms of leading their regions, their places, which are really relevant to local authorities and other sectors. In particular, looking at and grasping the opportunity for economic development and social inclusion. I think that change in perspective of this being a problem and an issue to one which is an opportunity is the key change that I think needs to happen.
Thank you, Niall. Heather?
Thank you, Niall. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to give two, if that's acceptable.
Go ahead, Heather.
So we've talked a little bit about the research today that was undertaken by LGIU with support from the Commercial Services Group. So I can't be here and not give a plug to that research. So if there's one thing that you do today as a local authority or a public sector leader, I think read that amazing research and understand more about the perspectives and the challenges of other local leaders around the country. Because I think one of the things that's come through really clearly today is that we can all benefit from learning and sharing from each other. And I think the other really important lesson for council leaders or public sector leaders is, again, the research has pointed really clearly to the fact that we've got this amazing level of ambition that's been sustained through some difficult times, through some periods of austerity, and yet we've got these delivery challenges. So I think there's a really important role for local authority leaders to think, what can they do as the leaders of their organisations to help unlock some of those delivery challenges? What can they do, whether it's from a system perspective or a capacity perspective? What can they do to support their organisations to build some momentum? Because momentum is really important to achieving that courageous, confident leadership.
Thank you.
Completely agree. I'd say I'd take the opportunity to revisit how you manage your energy category within your organisation. The tools and processes you may have built up over the last 15 or 20 years may have served you well to date, but actually it's a very different world we'd be going into. So as energy markets get more volatile, as there's increased pressure on energy prices and there's decarbonisation goals to meet, there needs to be a new approach to thinking about how you're achieving that in order to protect your costs and meet your decarbonisation targets.
Thank you, Nigel. Final word falls to you, Kat.
Thank you. I would say don't see energy planning as something marginal. Don't see it as something that sits just within climate teams within a local authority. See it and start to see it as something central, strategic, linked to economic development, linked to planning and linked to health, and as a core part of council strategy going forward. And alongside that, it's not just the council, it's about the whole borough. It's about bringing in partners, engaging them, working with them to come up with plans that work for local areas, that work for communities, and make the most of the opportunity of the energy transition.
A perfect final word. On which note, and with plenty to think about and plenty to do, until next time.